Resident Evil Village. I am really late on this one, and I originally planned to make a video on this game when it first came out, but with all the reviews coming out and all the hype for the game, I decided it would be better to let the hype die down a little bit so I could give you a more honest opinion that wouldn't be affected by all the hype just because it's a new game. However, even though I'm playing this a month later, I still thoroughly enjoyed this game, and this series has honestly been a really pleasant surprise for me. I'd never been into the horror genre much, and I had just played Resident Evil 7 and made a video on it right before Village came out, and if you watched that video, you would know I loved Resident Evil 7. And while Village is certainly much different from 7, it's good for different reasons while also building upon numerous systems and mechanics from Resident Evil 7, and probably the most notable is the gunplay. I love the gunplay from Village, the impacts of the bullets, the sounds, the aiming, it all feels extremely smooth and weighted. You can really feel the impact of shotgun blasts to the head when shooting all the different crazy enemies. There's so many different weapons and attachments that each have different strengths and weaknesses. There's a sniper rifle, magnum, a few different variants of shotguns and pistols, grenade launchers. The game really straps you up with so much firepower in this game, and it's well needed with the sheer number of monsters you have to kill. Now, one thing I definitely noticed is that standard difficulty in this game felt pretty easy. In Resident Evil 7, I struggled a lot on the normal difficulty, but I only had like 3 deaths in my entire playthrough of Village, and only 1 during a boss fight, which was from the final boss. There's definitely still some stressful and challenging moments, but the boss fights felt especially easy in this one. Don't get me wrong, they are still very well varied and look phenomenal visually, but I really didn't get the challenge like I did with Jack and Marguerite's boss fights in Resident Evil 7. And again, standard difficulty is pretty much the highest difficulty you can play on during your first playthrough. Now, I did play on PC with a mouse and keyboard, and I imagine it's a little more challenging when playing with a controller, but the game felt pretty easy nonetheless most times. Again, there were still a few close calls, but I really hardly died at all. The crafting system from 7 is back as well, and still as useful as ever, and has some even more improvements like how you can craft shotgun and sniper ammo instead of just pistol ammo. You also have way more inventory space in this than you did in 7. I felt like I was constantly running out of space in 7, but in Village that rarely happened, and it also helps that you can just buy a bigger bag from the Duke, which is also probably one of the bigger new additions of the game. I personally thought the addition of the Duke was pretty great. He was extremely useful for restocking ammo and buying recipes, gaining health buffs, and you can also upgrade your weapons and make them stronger, which you all do with the currency system the game implemented. And for the most part, I think it worked very well. They introduced it in a way that makes it feel essential and helpful rather than a nuisance, and it also made killing some of the stronger enemies more rewarding, as they often dropped treasure you could sell in exchange for money. Now, in terms of structure and pacing, Village certainly felt much different from Resident Evil 7. Resident Evil 7 was very slow paced and kind of gut-wrenching to play. It focused a lot on making you feel uneasy and constantly on edge, like something could jump out and attack you at any moment. While in Village kind of just throws everything it's got at you. Definitely more emphasis on faster paced action, just big swarms of enemies cornering you. And although I know a lot of people kind of liked that psychological horror aspect of 7, I still enjoyed the thrills from Village, and the game is certainly still scary at times, especially when you're getting chased or have to hide. I hate getting chased and hiding, it's just the worst. Especially trying to avoid Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters in the castle. There's something about being chased by an 8-foot hot lady that is extremely terrifying. But apart from the bosses, which I thought were great, there are a ton of enemies and different enemy types that you have to kill, each having different weak points, forcing you to kind of innovate and discover the weaknesses on the fly. Now, as for the story, Village definitely takes a different approach with its locations and characters when compared to 7. 7 just felt really grounded and more gritty to me, while Village feels a lot more chaotic, fantastical. It has a lot of magic, spiritual weirdness going on, which is fine. In fact, I like how they switched up the vibe, but it really depends on what you prefer in your games. Resident Evil isn't really a grounded, realistic series to begin with, so I was okay with it, even though I probably prefer that scary, more grounded approach from Resident Evil 7. The villains and characters are very over the top and dramatic at times, and they each have very interesting and distinct personalities to say the least. There's tons of characters you'll meet in this game. I think it's safe to say that no two are the same. And of course, we once again play as Ethan Winters, which again, I don't think he's anything too special as far as a protagonist goes. He has some really corny lines, like seriously, I don't know who comes up with these lines. But even though Ethan is often really stupid and annoying, I still enjoy playing as him, especially after going going through everything he went through in the last game, it just made me want to see how his journey continued. There's actually a lot of really cool reveals and surprises in the story. And there's that underlying mystery to the storyline like the other games where you have to put it together piece by piece, and then all of a sudden all the pieces come together and make sense by the end. You can certainly play Resident Evil Village without playing Resident Evil 7, and the story will make sense, but I definitely think you should play 7 first if you haven't. First of all, it's a great game, so why not? And secondly, everything is just going to be way easier to understand and comprehend, and it'll help you understand some of the characters a lot more, mainly Ethan and Mia. The world in this game though is absolutely stunning. Just the design of all the different locations. There's the village, the castle, the abandoned house, the swamps, and the factory, which was an absolute nightmare for me. I cannot tell you how many times I got lost in that extremely huge factory, but everything just looks great. Everything is so well detailed and spooky. I love how each area and environment feels different. The world certainly feels very open while still having a linear style to it, and there's just so much loot and cool items you can find by exploring or doing some extra puzzles and whatnot. The world progression in Village is just so satisfying because you have to go through so much to keep the story going forward. Boss fights, enemy encounters, puzzles, and it just feels really satisfying and accomplishing when you climb over that mountain of horror and look down. And as I'm sure you can tell by the video, this game is an absolute beauty. Graphics are super impressive, frame rates are great on PC, and it also takes advantage of some of that next-gen hardware like ray tracing. Certainly one of the better looking games I've ever played. So if you're thinking about pulling the trigger and purchasing Resident Evil Village, I would definitely recommend it. I had a great experience with this game, and there was never a moment where I felt bored, and I think it built upon Resident Evil 7 while also changing things up a bit, and overall it was really enjoyable. I probably still prefer 7 just because the atmosphere and horror of that game was fantastic, but Village was still a blast, and like I said earlier, definitely play 7 if you haven't already, and then play Village. But those were my honest thoughts on Resident Evil Village, and if you've already played the game, feel free to let me know what you thought of it in the comments, or let me know if this helped you make a decision on whether or not to buy the game. I've made many videos similar to this for so many different games. I have a whole playlist if you want to check that out, and consider subscribing for more in the future. Thanks for watching everybody, and have a great day.